I can see one of the bags. No need to be uncomfortable. Two more here, don't be shy. Someone has to sit in the front row.
Don't worry, I won't flash my tits. Oh wait, maybe I will.
I'll give you the
I just want to really quickly say I'm Eric Firestone, if you've never met before. Thank you for coming this evening. I'm really honored that we have pulled off this incredible show, Marcia Marcus. It's really an effort of love, and there's a lot of proof. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Jennifer Samet, who's the head of archive and research with the gallery, and it's a continuum of what the gallery is about, which is to really re-examine and reintroduce work that just needs to be out and seeing the bigger picture. So, thank you again.
Hi, thank you everyone for coming tonight. It's such a pleasure to see all of you here. And thank you, Eric, for your vision and belief and love in teaching. So nice to be here with this work. And thank you to Marcia Marcus, first of all. And her daughter Kate, who is with us here, recording the panel tonight. Okay, I'm going to introduce our panel. So this is David Cohen, who will be moderating our panel. We are very lucky to have the master panel moderator here. He really is. He is the editor and publisher of artcritical.com and founder and moderator of the Review panel, which is the critics forum hosted by the Brooklyn Public Library and the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, which is also podcast at his website, Artcritical. He was gallery director at the New York Studio School from 2001 to 2010, and art critic and contributing editor at the New York Sun from 2003 to 2008. Born in London and educated at the University of Sussex and at the Courtauld Institute of Art, David wrote for leading newspapers and magazines in England and around the world before emigrating to the United States in 1999. And his books include Alex Katz' Collage, a Catalog Resume, 2005. Angela Dufresne grew up in the suburbs of Kansas City and received her BFA from the Kansas City Art Institute and her MFA from Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia. Her work has been exhibited at Monument Row Gallery and CRG. I had the pleasure of working with Angie on an exhibition of videos and drawings at Stephen Harvey Fine Art Projects. She is an assistant professor at the Rhode Island School of Design and led the RISD in Rome program last year, and then taught at Skowhegan School all summer. So I am very thrilled to have Angie back in New York, as I know a lot of us are this fall. Solo exhibitions of her work have been held at Hammer Projects, Hammer Museum, and the McAllister Gallery, St. Paul, Minnesota. And she has an upcoming exhibition next year at the Kemper Museum. Mimi Gross is a painter, set and costume designer, and maker of interior and exterior installations. She has lived and worked in Tribeca for the last 40 years. And over the last year, Mimi Gross's work was presented in several venues, including the Inventing Downtown exhibition at the Gray Art Gallery of NYU, a group show at Derek Eller Gallery, Art Market Provincetown, and a large-scale paintings commission for the Kentucky Chandler Hospital, as well as a solo exhibition this past year at the Shrine Gallery in the Lower East Side. From 1960 to 76, Mimi collaborated with artist Red Grooms on many large multi-dimensional installations, including the fabled Ruckus Manhattan. She's collaborated with the dancer Douglas Dunn on more than 25 dances, designing set and costumes, beginning with Foot Rules in 1978. She was also a friend of Marcia Marcus and a central part of Marcus's artist community in Provincetown, New York, and Florence in the late 50s and 60s, along with Jay Mather, Bob Thompson, and Red Grooms. Woo! born in Memphis, Tennessee, to parents of Ghanaian heritage. His work has appeared in exhibitions at Roberts and Tilton Gallery in Los Angeles, Sotheby's S2 Gallery in New York, and Luce Gallery in Turin, Italy. He is the recipient of the C12 Emerging Artist Award 2017, and was also awarded the 2016 Sugar Hill Museum Artist in Residence, and currently, 2017, the Sharp Relentless Studio Program in New York City. He's a graduate of Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, earned a master's degree in art education from Harvard, and an MFA in painting at Hunter College. And you have some upcoming projects.
Yes, a couple, yes.
Okay, tell us.
I have a group show at Monte de Carlos in Switzerland that's happening in December, and a solo at Nina Johnson in Miami, and then a solo at Night Gallery in LA, and then another one with Josh Lilly in London. So.
Yay!
Over to David.
Thank you very much. Wow, what spirited introductions. It's almost time to go home now. The fourth one, you see why they call her the director of archive and research. You missed out my secondary education. That's no, thank you very much, Jen. It's really incredibly exciting to be here. We were sitting in the green room before, and Mimi said, well, are you interested in the work, or the artist, or the environment? And I felt like somebody who has just gone to his favorite restaurant and they say, we can offer you this, this, and this. And I'll say, yes, I'll take it all. Thank you. Because what does one not want on such a fabulous lineup? Of course, where the emphasis lies will develop in the course of our conversation. I suspect it will need to begin and end with the work, because it's just such an extraordinary, exceptional. You know, sometimes it's like you go somewhere and somebody was given or inherited a beautiful Cadillac or Buick or something from the 60s, and they just kept it in the garage, and once a year the chauffeur tuned it up, but nobody ever took it out for a ride, and then suddenly somebody says, this is a damn good car, let's take it for a ride, and they just open the garage, and they drive out, and all those people in their SUVs and their miserable whatever turn around and say, whoa, where has that been? Because these have been a hidden treasure, and these are a revelation, a window onto something quite riveting. It's this very strange phenomenon. It's a bit like going to Petra in Jordan. You know, you go there and you say it's familiar because it reminds you of this kind of architecture and that kind of architecture and the other kind of architecture. And yet, you have never seen this in your life. I mean, this is Namibian architecture, which is a rather distinct school. So, I mean, this is her works recall so many of the people we find really interesting, and yet they are very, very much their own thing and exist in independence of whatever it might remind us of, and have that kind of locked in the garage freshness that I was alluding to. So, as Jen has kind of intimated in some, well, certainly in introducing Mimi, Mimi is our living link to the woman herself. She'll describe for us the quality of the kind of friendship she had, and she will be our go-to, the oracle, our source on how Marcia was possibly responding to her environment, and how she was, what her values were that are most evident in the work, and the dilemmas she would have faced also as a woman in an environment that we can all imagine, or we can hardly imagine, as inhospitable to serious creative endeavor in the 1960s and 70s. Angie and Derek, like me, are coming with sort of bewildered new eyes, relatively speaking, to this work, though each will describe what they have in their own terms, how they relate to it. Angela, I and Derek are both, in fact all three panelists are people whose work I've admired and followed for quite some time. Derek, a couple of years ago, I met at an art fair and was just absolutely bowled over by his work. I've asked Jen if anybody hasn't gone ahead and Googled the artists that we're seeing tonight, or perhaps indeed looking at it on your phone this very minute. One of the computers at the back will have some of the pages of websites up. But Derek's work, his interest in the vocabularies of sporting characters and of people of different backgrounds, and a kind of certain historicity in the work, but at the same time very contemporary, and the beautiful kind of collision of an American naive flattening with a deeply European modernist sensibility is something that I think makes him a real natural to bring his insights into the work of Marcia Marcus. And Angela is so much the master of a kind of Renaissance painting, and yet with a hipster, other outsidery present sensibility that she, I know, is going to have something to say on Marcia Marcus, because these are images from the 60s and 70s which are burning hot with the kind of issues and excitement of that period. And at the same time, they are figure paintings, complex figure paintings, and scene paintings that put us right back into old master easel painting and fresco painting, and that's why I brought these guys together. That's how we have this amazing panel. You'll from now on, I hope, be hearing less from me. But that's who we have tonight. And I think, Mimi, I would really like to start with you because of your personal connection with Marcia. Tell us how...
I'd first like to totally disagree with you that it's like going to Petra.
Right.
Having gone to Petra and having known Marcia.
Right.
That's it. But
I didn't
I
really...
just want to point out the wonderful painting of the woman in the yellow hoodie.
Yes.
Is Emily Mason.
Right.
Wonderful
Wolfgang's,
painter. And she is now almost 90 years old, and she looks exactly the same.
She has the same orange bikini, or is she?
When got worn out, she's better naked. But the point is that her figure is the same, and she still wears little ponytails.
Yeah, I have
and
to
she
know
has
that
that same delicate way of standing.
Yes.
It's an incredibly realistic portrait. In this painting, I don't recognize, there's Jill Johnston, who some of you may know is the great writer about performance and dance in the 60s for The Voice. And sitting in the black coat is the gorgeous belle Barbara Forst. She was a great belle of Soho. And Marcia, and I don't know who the...
That's her father and Marcia herself as a child from a photograph.
Well, there you are.
Very Petra-like.
I did go to Petra. It is, everybody should go there and know.
Yes, yes. The point about Petra was just to say that it's
It's
familiar and yet weird at the same time. That's
Yeah,
what
but
I was
if
saying.
you have to go through this long canyon before you
Yes.
get there.
Right. Well, we had to come up these stairs to get here.
That was the point. Marcia, of course.
And as I said, you won't be hearing much from me anymore. So Mimi, how did you meet Marcia? Tell us how you met Marcia.
No, I want to point out her love of Mantegna, which is, they might as well go for the real thing.
Yes.
Because her love of Renaissance painting is apparent, and she did have a trip to Italy when she received a grant from Walter Gutman, who in general supported a lot of downtown artists when nobody else did, including our movie Shoot the Moon, which everyone else rejected. And she was there for almost a year, and I was there when Kate was born, and she was born 1 block away from where I was living. And
Wow.
so her sister Jane was in a stroller, and I painted her in the stroller. And Marcia would leave Jane outside of a store because Italians love little kids.
Yes.
So she was totally safe, could leave her anywhere, which she did.
Right.
She'd go to a museum and leave Jane in the stroller. Before Kate was born, finally Kate got born and it was a little bit different.
Right.
But then she had Terry, her husband too, was a devoted helper actually. So one of the other things besides Mantegna is Marcia's extraordinary work ethic, which I think is, if I have anything to say, that's basically it. It's apparent in the work, but also it meant everything else was, in love of her family was real, but everything was second to her work hours, and I'm sure you remember it. And it was also something that she claimed she learned from Edwin Dickinson, who was her professor at the Art Students League. She said he taught her to work, to never stop working, and so she did. So that's my main message. She was a very, very colorful person, and she did have lots of great parties. It was like 7 flights. Wasn't it 7 flights? 4. Felt like more than that.
Not unlike coming up here.
Yeah, I remember once Terry parked really quickly near the house, and he went to the store maybe 10 minutes later, and all the wheels of all the tires were gone. It was Avenue D. Yeah, it was a great place, and in that place there were many, many wonderful parties.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did pose for Marcia. We watched Fred Astaire movies while I was posing.
Nice. Were you able to stay still with watching all that dance? I mean, yeah, it didn't inspire you to like tap around a bit? Well, I'm sure Marcia would have kept you in line.
She probably had some stick for all I
Yes.
remember.
Yeah. So Angela, how do you come to know Marcia's work, and what are your impressions?
Hipster impressions. No, just kidding. I had seen some of the works up at Williams College, so there's the portrait back there with the landscape of that. It's very kind of, and loved them and documented them and thought, who is this under-recognized amazing woman? And my reaction would be, because I've only just now read any kind of significant amount about her, was like artists like Judith Lanier and like the changes that someone like Joan Brown went through in this around the same time from, and we were, and Derek and I were just talking about that back in the green room. Or I was talking to Derek, he was
Listening patiently.
he was politely listening to me. Thank you, Derek. My thought was that there was really 4 things going on that are incredibly helpful for me. Well, there's about 8,000 things that are going on, but there's like 4 things that I could say quickly that help me as a painter today who happens to have a vagina. And that, not to be an essentialist or anything so obscene, but that number 1, she was grappling with the influences and the challenges and the critique that minimalism was bringing to painting, like all of the big guys who were getting big bucks for doing the same thing and wasn't getting the recognition. She was able to metabolize the influence of history and create a synchronic articulation of contemporaneousness and historic understanding of painting at the same time, which is blowing my mind. She was definitely, and I'm going to tag into, and by the way, I'm really honored to be with all of you. I mean, especially Mimi, just because she's a goddess of New York City that we all need to bow down to. As Jennifer Hickey says in her posts, bow down. that her work ethic was not learned from anyone. You can't learn work ethic like this as a painter from anyone else. You have to be obsessed, you have to be a freak, you have to be perverted, you have to have the appetite. And the appetite of these paintings it embodies an ambition that is as old as Rome and as new as Warhol at the time. And the fourth thing, which is incredibly important, that I was going to say, like someone like Judith Lanier or Alice Neal or Mimi, is the fact that she never put her feminine, her woman, cell phone down. She never put aside her feminine subjectivity to make art. She always held the intensity, the intimacy, the emotional implications of what women do when they look at each other and witness each other into the painting or perform in the painting, right? Like I think in the essay in the catalog, there's talk about comparing her to Cindy Sherman and all this stuff, and I think that is more, it's a little ridiculous, but in that sense, like what she's doing is so empathetic and so much from a place of love. It is not the same kind of critique of the creation of persona and identity as that. I mean, I understand wanting to bring significance to this work, but I think actually the fact that she never surrenders her subjectivity as a woman to look at other women, to try to take the viewer, to witness, and to drag the viewer into that space is incredibly rigorous and deeply meaningful and other than many of those pursuits that other people have had. And in this way, this is something where I just deeply identify with that as an ambition, that as a project, and that as something that really is to a certain extent, I mean, maybe it's not okay, I'm just going to throw this out there because I'm sort of known for this. Maybe it's not a nice car in the garage. Maybe that nobody's seen in a while, but like a really sexy, like hairy vagina with like a dildo on it, right? It's like this thing of like this sort of really unapologetic way of celebrating the shared, the kind of looking that a woman does and shares with other women. And that way it's like Cassatt, the performativity of them are like, and the rigor of them is like Gentileschi.
Okay, I think we'll all be looking
Well,
at these
I'd like
paintings a
to
very different way now.
I'd like to just say that what Angela is saying is contemporary, and in the time when Marcia was painting, it was, you wouldn't say in the closet, because she was relatively known in the late 50s and 60s. You know, she did have a genuine professional reputation and was showing and felt successful herself. However, the fight for it was real.
Yeah.
And it was still downtown. You know, it's not like it got overboard. It just was limited within itself. Whereas you can speak, you have the freedom knowing that it's ingrained in you, this without a doubt.
Yeah.
With her, she had to push it and make it happen.
Yeah.
And I think that people should recognize that.
That's amazing. And I'm saying it, I think, because I'm trying to recognize
Yes,
you are.
how important that is and how much it made space for me.
I think we'll definitely be coming back to this issue. But Derek, I'd like to broaden the reach now to include something that I feel is a strong affinity between your work and Marcia's, and that is that there is this play in your work and in hers between the present and a sense of the archaic or history and a kind of layering of time. But there's also a way in which this play with a very stylized forms of both likeness and modes of representation and kinds of patterning, they all achieve a kind of a wistful or vulnerable sensibility. And that's, I wonder if you're noticing an affinity there with what you're interested in doing and what you're able to respond to in Marcia's work.
Well, I definitely respond, you know, at a kind of a sensory level. I think when I saw these images initially, they were, you know, on a computer screen. And I think that really sells these works short because they appear to be very flat. But one of the things that I really responded to right away was her touch and how much translucence and layering and kind of building of the painting that she shows. There's a lot of the architecture that's evident. But I'd like to bring to the conversation, I guess, some contemporary examples of portraiture that I think really are in conversation with this work, like the work of Barclay Hendricks and Amy Sherrill, who's a young African-American woman artist who was just tapped to paint Michelle Obama. But I really see a relationship between how Amy was thinking about, how she is thinking about portraiture and what we see from these works. But when I make a painting, I try to make one that I hope will last for 20 years, 30 years or longer.
Or centuries.
Or centuries. I'm not so audacious to say, but I'm really struck by how contemporary the works feel. They don't feel like old works. They feel so fresh. And I think to be able to tap into something and to make the kind of image that can last the way these do and be in conversation over decades is pretty amazing. So yes, and that I think in studying them more closely, I didn't know that this was like some kind of stucco down here on this.
Yeah, I think it's actually cement or sand. At the
It looks
bottom.
like cement or sand.
And there's a flower in her hair.
And there's an actual, you know, dead flower, and there's some collaging with newspaper. That I'm very much interested in collaging and texture and this play between what is real and what is an object. And so there's a lot of sophistication in work, but I guess the timelessness of them is something that I probably learned from the most.
Yeah. I mean, Mimi, she's a graduate of the Cooper Union as well as studying at the Art Students League with Dickinson, as we know. And the Cooper Union, as Alex Katz has described in his memoirs, and he was a classmate of hers, he described it in terms of its kind of what he calls its provincial modernism, in that there's a generation of artists still very much steeped in École de Paris and Braque and Picasso and Drouin people. In many ways I can see Marcia breaking free of that kind of pedagogy, but at the same time, just in the example of that sand in that element and the collage elements in the work, and also in some other kind of formal decisions, there does seem to be some rootedness in quite a European sensibility. I wonder how much of these paintings are breaking into a very American idiom and how much they are steeped in older traditions. Do you have a sense of how she felt personally towards such an issue as that?
I don't know what she thought personally. Kate might.
Well, no, we'll bring in Kate a little later. But,
Do you mind if I chime in a little bit?
yeah, please.
Like this painting instantly made me think of Domenico Mioli. Now, they were in Italy at the time. Did you guys know him? Or
No.
no? But I'm sure they were aware of his work. And to me, the way in which Mioli was metabolizing Renaissance painting and the influx of American pop art in Rome
Yeah.
at the
I
time.
did not know him.
This is
She didn't-
before she went to Italy.
It is,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Also,
But
she,
he used sand in the painting like that. Yes. Sorry, Mimi.
a lot of people use sand.
Yeah.
What I feel is that Marcia kind of got an osmosis from Florence more than
Yeah.
literally rushing to the frescoes.
Right.
The big painting with red laying down on the bottom,
Yeah.
that was a killer. You know, it was, he nearly died posing God witness, freezing. He was laying on a stone, some kind of pedestal, excuse me. But she made a wonderful portrait of him, especially the feet, looked just like him. But the sensibility of that big painting, which is overwhelmingly ambitious,
Yeah.
she did right there, Terry, by herself, and immediately rented some car. She's ready to go, and rented a small place on Piazzale Michelangelo, which is the view, and immediately started this humongous painting. you know, and then shortly after that, Kate was born. Well, it was pretty amazing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us, I mean, I want to explore and learn both the history and the context, but also just
To go,
we're at liberty to misread and take possession of these paintings and do what we like with them. And I want to explore one particular issue, and that is her strong affinity with people of color. Why there is, just in this selection of work, we have the exquisite painting of Jack, which is the boy on that end wall there, and then there's the woman looking in the mirror, or not looking away from the mirror, but she's in her bare midriff and an extraordinary orange outfit, and even Emily Mason almost is made to look like a person of color, although she's not. But and then there's an African American probably family or a Caribbean family on the beach. Do we have some?
I have a lot to say about
Well,
that.
say a lot and then a short. Give us some info, and then I want us to, the younger panelists to speculate as well once they hear the.
Well, only that before 1964, the community downtown was incredibly integrated with great informality and love. And Sheila, who I knew all these years, we're all friends. Sheila is the former wife of Jay Milder. And it was a community that color was not an issue, although for Black people it might have been sometimes, but basically wasn't. It was full of love. The jazz scene was extremely lively. There were lots of places to go to hear music, and it was almost free or low priced and very available. There were parties all the time, and musicians were integrated. Comes integration, quote unquote, suddenly there's a barrier. All of our friends changed their names, Leroy Jones most famous, and suddenly it was self-conscious, and you'd go to a party and do this, oh, you touched me. It was rough, and of course the situation is worse than ever now, but it was a change that was incredible how it affected the art community and the social life. And it's something that you don't know particularly about now, but it really is true.
So is it just that it was
Sheila thinks
such a happily integrated that she wouldn't have noticed that half people interesting.
Well, she'd have a party, for example. Marcia and Terry would have a party, for example, and there were as many, all different colored people.
Yeah.
Every color.
Yeah, but somebody who is a fiercely ambitious artist and wants to make her mark and is incredibly thoughtful and judicious in every detail that she includes in her work, can't be oblivious to the fact that she's made what is in the history of representation and a fairly unusual choice to include such a high percentage of people of color. So.
I don't think it might be a bigger issue to you.
Yeah, I think so.
That's
right.
And I don't mean that as a dig.
Natural.
No, that's okay.
But when I look at the works of Alice Neal, for example,
Yeah.
who was also born in New York City, she seemed to paint her world and the people in her world. And it looks to me that this is a sampling of her life, the trips to Europe,
Well
painting
said.
outdoors,
That's
right?
exactly right.
And as someone who makes paintings, I understand that when you think about paintings or talk about them or critique them, they become politicized, and there's a different level of analysis. But I think every good artist is a reflection of her or his own life. And that's what I get from looking at least this selection of paintings. And that you
It's
seem to bear
natural.
that out.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's like, will you pose for me? Right.
Right. I feel that kind of sincerity. I mean, you're a person of color, you're always wondering why or what the intention is, but I trust it. And I think, I think it's apparent. It's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I feel the same way, and I also feel I feel like we should be a little cautious to kind of like recontextualize this thing as like either some kind of utopic period in Tribeca or Soho at the time, because as much as the parties were and the hanging out might have been, there might have been a kind of equality or a sort of democratic way in which people were hanging out that was integrated. And I will take James Baldwin's definition of what integration means in that way. The museums and the galleries weren't. So there's a whole other level, there's a whole other portal in which the parties might have been great, but the actual exposure was great. And it's sort of, and it's also like, we also don't, and I think this is where I would always have to defer to Mimi on this, but you know, there's been a lot of talk about Carol Rama. Oh, she was another Cadillac that was parked in the garage and nobody knew about until it came out. But in fact, she had a show in Italy almost every year of her life. And nobody knew who she was, and now she's had this show at the New Museum. But she was quite a well-established artist at the time, and fully for her singularity as an artist. And
Dorothy Annone.
Whereas with Dorothy Annone, whereas Bob Thompson is a high-profile person, but there's hundreds of other African American artists at that time that went unrecognized and were in fact erased historically. So. And I don't want to undermine that or like over romanticize the fact that she did this thing, which we all should have been doing.
On the other hand, the issue of women is interesting from that time because as lively as the races were integrated, the women were not accepted in the way they are now. And that's a completely different story, as everybody here knows, that you were the wife, your girlfriend, or the hang around, or groupie.
Yeah.
But you certainly weren't the artist. And in Marcia's case, she had parties. She was, picking people to pose. She was the artist, which is very singular about her.
I wonder if she knew Stettheimer's parties, like if that was
No, she's not that old.
not that she went to them, but if she knew about them. Is that
We all knew Stettheimer mainly from the dollhouse.
Yes.
Right.
It wasn't like we knew that many paintings by her. I hope everyone saw the show.
It was amazing.
Yeah, extraordinary show.
And the opera was amazing.
And the opera was absolutely amazing. Also the one she didn't do.
Yeah, the one she didn't, that was the one I was thinking. But both.
Well, I think Marcia was very aware of that concept you mentioned, where she was an American artist looking at Italian art.
Right.
And the minimalism idea is certainly interesting. She had her own sense of where she was at in terms of pop art as well as minimalism.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's
very
really
clear.
her era. And what is...
By minimalism, I don't quite know what we mean, because I know that they're restrained and that they have great economy, but I don't think anyone would class her or Alex Katz or Will Barnett as minimalists.
I wouldn't put her in the same category anyway, but the point is that I think that the clarity of her edges
Yes.
and the seriousness of modular tones, that makes her a minimalist by nature,
Yeah.
not literally in a geometric abstract sense.
That's right.
Okay. No.
Minimalist with a small m.
What?
So
Minimalist
minimalism
with a
is
small m.
small.
Sure.
Yeah.
Marcia with a big M.
Mimi with two M's.
Is there only two in there?
And of course, a great pair of eyes. Yes. Well, yeah, it's interesting that you resisted when you said I want to put them in the same category as Will Barnett or Alex Katz. I mean, can we not see some strong affinities between these three artists?
There is an affinity with Will Barnett's work, yes,
Yes.
in terms of composition more than anything. But I
Yes.
think Marcia is actually more contemporary in the sense of her selection of subject matter.
More contemporary, you mean
To
more
Will
relevant
Barnett.
now? Or-
Yeah, if there were 3 paintings by Will Barnett with 3 paintings by Marcia,
Yeah.
I think one would feel more contemporary with Marcia's, as I do seeing him now. However, I do love Will Barnett's work
Yeah.
as a person.
What
And
I
he
saw,
was a great
yeah.
teacher. He was a wonderful teacher as well.
Yes, yes. But with Alex Katz, obviously, I mean, and Lois Dodd and Marcia, I mean, they're in the same class, literally at school, and if you took their work and then showed them in the context of the rest of the entire history of art, you'd say, okay, those three have got something in common. I mean, I don't think there's...
Subject-wise.
No, technique-wise, subject-wise, composition-wise, sensibility-wise,
I think
shape consciousness-wise.
I think what's happening here is that this is a critic you have a wonderful art historical knowledge, and the way a critic looks at a painting, the way artists look at them are sometimes different, not at odds.
Right.
But I think that that's what's happening because contextualizing the work is really important for history. But you knew the artist, and you knew her personally, and contextualizing doesn't really matter, right? As much.
No, not at all.
Right. So I think that's just.
Then you're the synthesis because you didn't know the artist, and you're not an art critic, and you're a wonderful painter. So you tell us if you think it's far-fetched to think that her work and Alex Katz have
Well
affinity.
said.
No, I think first of all, I'm trying to keep peace on the panel.
But my job as a moderator is to stir things up.
Yeah, that's true. As long as you're okay.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I agree with both, actually. I mean, I do agree with what you're saying.
We're talking about the paint.
Yeah, about the paint. You know what I'm curious about is her sense of design, the reductionist approach. She removed a lot of information. There's a lot of information that she withholds. And there's a strong sense of graphic sensibility and design. I want to know where that might have come from, or that impulse, or I'm just curious. You can assign the question as you like, but
No, you asked that. No.
yeah. But I'm just curious about that because it's a very distinct decision.
Observation and patience.
Okay.
One thing I super remember when I was posing for her, she would have these globs of paint and put them on a palette knife and very slowly take a little paint at a time off the palette knife rather than the glob.
Interesting.
And then at the end, she saved her globs by putting water on top of them so that
Submerge
they'd
them.
stay. No, just covered them with water
Right.
so they would stay
Yeah.
wet,
Yeah.
which is a good technique too.
Yeah, I've done that. It works pretty good.
Yeah.
Symptomatic of a depression era
Well,
of childhood.
especially, no, it's when
No, you
you
don't
mix
want to
it,
waste paint.
yeah, you mix
That's
in
what I mean.
color
Yeah.
and, God knows
Yeah.
you can never mix exactly that color again,
Right.
No.
even if you want to.
And speaking of color, I mean, looking at some of these, I think it's harder, these nuances in white or these creams, that close kind of chromatic tension is very difficult to pull off.
Right.
So you're saying she was methodical and spent a lot of time
Yeah.
achieving these colors, yeah.
It's
Obvious.
very clear.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm like, I don't understand why it's such a hard thing to think about, like, the relationship these have to minimalism, but yet everybody can talk about Chuck Close and the grid and the kind of abstracting as being somehow a reaction or a critique of minimalism. Like, it makes perfect sense to me, the way in which, but you can see there's a pink on the left side of her head, the gray
I was
silver
just
tone is
thinking about that.
pinkish on the left side, and it gets really gray on the side of the file. And that's the process of working. And it's also just the process of flattening and doing what Derek said beautifully, which is to a certain extent editing and deleting out superfluous information. But that process of editing is present in the fact that the grays don't match, and that's what makes that painting so amazing. The yellows don't perfectly match, right? There's a temporality to all of that that is definitely not about representation.
Well, except
Right,
that the
it's-
grey area is a photograph, and it is a reconstruction of a photograph. So I think it's very much about being the black and white of photography against the color of life.
But it's so conceptual, if that's a way of describing
And
it.
also its contrast with the cape, which has this yellow in it, which
Yeah.
the same yellow that's in the background, and
Yes.
it makes that gray really richer and
Sure,
in front of us more.
sure. And that lovely way that her heel is like a connection between these two worlds, the
The two paintings.
patterned texture.
I mean, and this is, I mean, we haven't even brought up Piero, but like this sense of like, of stillness and the kind of infinite frozen moment that is so related to what so many artists were trying to do at that time. Taking out the gestures and freezing things in time. I don't know. And the reduction of form into something that addresses the theatricality of the painting frame and freezes it and indexes just how much the frame is a limitation. And especially in this one, like the way she turns it on its side is
the diamond. Yes, yeah.
I mean, she's so smart about kind of calling that out, and it's like that could just as easily be like I don't know, Kate Nolan or something. I don't know, that she throws a figure in there. I think she understands that you can place a figure in that configuration and still have that kind of. The word is like a very. It's a base kind of relationship with the materiality of the thing. It's not formal.
That's what she has in common with Alex, who did some oval portraits of Ada and some diamond portraits of Ada around that time.
Yeah.
Well, Red had a gallery on 24th Street in which he showed Marcia's work and Alex's work. But basically they didn't hang out together.
They didn't hang out, and the psychology in these paintings are completely different than Alex's.
Yeah.
Oh yes, absolutely. She's a teller of tales, and she's with her there's a whole story, and with Alex it's strictly a portrait, a type. That's the way I see it.
No, well, he has his stories when he does like the cocktail party that has many, many portraits and they interact with one another.
Yeah, but even there it's like an accumulation of many portraits, and with her a singular portrait is telling a story. I would.
Richly.
Yeah.
I think the difference between her and Katz to me is she chooses to render at times and at times to withhold. Whereas most of the Katz that I see, it is graphic throughout. There's a concern with flatness throughout,
and speed.
Alex
has a
sticking to the style rather than varying it.
Right.
That's right. It's about style and concision and compression. Yeah. And that's why I say that she, to a certain extent, and people can shoot me for this, but she, to a certain extent, has this thing that I think painters like Beccafumi or Duccio has, which is that you go through vast areas of the paintings where it's just gold leaf or ooze, and then suddenly you lock into this fucked up person that's staring out of the painting at you, and you're like, ah! Like, how'd that get there?
What about a baby?
And it's like, Katz never does that. I mean, I love Katz, but it's like this, we ride through these paintings in this luxury of confidence and blah, blah, blah. And with her, it's like we move through the painting in these complex gestural configurations where it's like we go from that hand and the cane to those beautiful tiles to that like weird distorted NBC logo. Then there's this like fucked up thing, and then it's like this girl is trying to seduce me and she's going to kill me. And it's like, this is what I mean by like the level of implication of a woman looking versus a man looking.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
No need to apologize, because Alex Katz is more of a modernist than she is, and that's why I think her work may look more contemporary, because I think she is actually, without necessarily intending it, this mix of speeds and degrees of rendering with open, you guys want to call it minimal, I just want to call it reductive open space. That mix of...
But we don't want to call it minimal.
That mix of, let me finish my sentence, mix of temperatures and strategies and devices, which you're saying is a feminine way of looking at the world, I'd say is a more traditional way of constructing a painting. And maybe that's what makes it look more postmodern.
But are you rejecting the idea of her gaze as a woman, or no?
I'm not enthusiastic about that kind of essentialism, but I think I'm open to it. But I'm more interested in whether it's modernist or... I'm more interested in the difference between Alex and Marcia is not the difference between male and female, it's the difference between somebody whose ambition is in Katz's case, is one of a high style, but a formal integrity. And I think with Marcia, there's more kind of nuance of local decisions about style and strategy that you wouldn't get in a Katz. Katz is more all over. I think Katz's energy and ambition is to make paintings as immediate and sensational as a Franz Klein, but with a figurative subject. And I don't think Marcia's interest lay there.
And therein lies the connection to the kind of masculine canon. Whatever. I like what you said a lot about the way in which she actually is, to a certain extent, making a more traditional painting.
Yeah.
And I think it's in that way. It's because I think she's living in many places in Italy. Very obviously, you walk in this room and the Italian is massive in here. But you.
She
Italy was quite a
In Florence, yeah.
And there wasn't a singular trip to Arezzo to see the Pierrots, which, let's talk about Pierrot and Marcia.
Okay.
Because it's more fun. It's just, she got
And more
his,
flattering as well, isn't it?
she got
Yes.
his,
Why talk about Alex or Barnett if you can
Yeah,
talk about
I mean-
Pierrot? Right.
right,
Yes.
Yeah, she deserves it. I agree.
yeah, I think, it also is really what she was
But let's not
about.
call Pierrot a minimalist, please.
It wasn't,
Right. I won't really
no,
call
it
it.
would never call
Yeah.
Pierrot minimalist.
Okay.
But I would say that that her love of Pierrot comes through,
Yeah.
and that the lyricism of Pierrot, flow, the charm, the delicate gestures, that these are things that she was truly inspired by. That's great, obsessed and love. And she, although she was in Florence, there were some Pierrots there, but for example, she didn't know about Pontormo. Now today, Pontormo is something that you breathe in. He's part of our life.
Yeah.
But at that
Been
time,
admitted into the
his
canon,
paintings
he's
were not
considered suspect.
not conserved, and he and other mannerists were basically put down.
Yeah.
Duccio was our guy, and after Duccio, well, Cimabue, Duccio, Giotto. Those were the three biggies when we lived in Florence.
Right. Right.
And Piero and Uccello came along.
But I mean, I know we're supposed to be talking about Pierrot, and I shouldn't bring back Katz. But if you look at the portrait of Lucas Samaras in the Dunes, at one level, and you can all see it afterwards, it's a gold painting on this side. On the one hand, and this relates to the fact that she's in Provincetown on the dunes. Alex also visits Provincetown, makes a collage in exactly the same year that almost looks, as if they were in the same dune, and maybe they were. But what Marcia's willing to do in making a portrait of a Greek guy is make it look like a Greek icon, bringing in the gold, and it's as if each picture, each personality demands almost a narrative kind of solution to what style strategy to adopt in making that the most convincing portrait of that person, whereas Alex, everyone is just an Alex Katz in an Alex Katz painting. Now, I'm not saying that makes one stronger or weaker. I'm just saying that is a distinction, and if it's a distinction of character or quality or gender, I don't know, but there's an interesting distinction there. You know what I think would be very good, and that is that we have an audience here made up of artists and real lovers of art, and I'd like to get some more perspectives, and it doesn't have to be a question, just your own responses to what you're seeing is very cool as well. Yes, front row.
Well, I'm curious because of one thing interests me, historically speaking, which is I knew Marcia Marcus's work through Mimi in the early 70s.
Right.
And it really stayed with me, but then she disappears in some sense. And it's very interesting to see this work now. I think it's marvelous work, and it's so related to artists that we're thinking about now. But that period was the period of feminist art history, of looking, just sort of basically looking for women artists to create a new canon. And so someone like Sylvia Slay was picked up and put into that canon. And now when I look at it, I think, well, why wasn't Marcia?
She didn't have a Larry, her husband. Wow.
Lawrence Holloway was
Well, that's an odd way. That's an odd thing, because
What
how
way?
I mean, I understand what you're saying, except that in terms of the women who were trying to create the history,
Yeah.
why, there's some reason that maybe has something to do with her own attitude, I don't know, where she did not put herself, I don't know what the story is, but I wonder why she was not seeing the work she was doing, because people were interested in figuration, they were interested in representation of women,
You know, everybody needs somebody, and Marcia, Red did try to put Marcia into Marlborough Gallery, and they didn't like her work. Probably was too feminine.
Well, no, but that's
Yeah, it was-
that's what I'm saying though, but there were women who were looking, just that's the moment where Alice Neal's career is
Yeah, she has
refocused.
a retrospective.
And whatever she thought about feminism, people started to want her to speak and appear. And so it's almost like she didn't have to care that much about the feminist movement herself. It came to her and it created a dialogue about her. And just at that moment, Marcia seems not to be
there anymore.
there. And I mean, I'm glad now the work is
Yeah.
seen.
Well, from a family way, she had, that was a very difficult time, and that might have, it was financially difficult for her, as well as she got divorced. You know, there were things that were setbacks, and those kind of setbacks can total.
Right.
You know?
That's
And I don't really know, I mean, I'm curious with you, because there were years and years I didn't see Marcia, even though for several years around this time I saw her very, very frequently. So there you are, I can answer. It's very legitimate what you're saying, though.
Thank you. I meant to also, if I could just please, I meant to ask if people would tell us their name, because you know
It's Mira Shore.
I'm Mira Shore.
Mira Shore, all right.
I'm sorry, I'm Sheila Schwick, and, no, you're not good on
Oh,
mine.
I'm sorry.
What I wanted to say, I don't keep track of dates in my life, but I do remember there was a time when she was extremely depressed because a friend of mine would tell me what was going on with Marcia, and I really felt very bad. I wasn't close enough to her to reach out to her directly.
She didn't want it.
I had a feeling she didn't, but in other words, you know, people aren't always up to.
No, what both of you were
Yeah,
saying, of
right.
course, enriches
Yeah.
how art history gets written.
That's
so
right.
that a setback
Yes.
that
Right.
sets someone back is enough to, especially for a woman artist or an artist of color, it's just enough to set them off into Nowheresville. And it's great.
Yeah.
And well,
Well, she had two children as
Yeah.
well.
I wanted to say two more things that I think.
so did other women.
So did other women artists.
Yeah.
I want to say one thing, and that is that people keep talking about the parties. And I want to point out that people were struggling. They were working their asses, and they didn't have much money. And people from the outside said, oh, the parties, we want to know about the parties. I'm not talking about you, sir. I'm talking about, you know, other talks.
Yes.
And I say to myself, well, probably they are interested in the parties, and they probably would have liked to have come to the party, but the party was not nearly as important as the work
Her work.
and the money and just everyday struggles. And for Marcia to do this blows me away, because she went through so much to reach
right.
this. I have great respect for her, and I just want to say one more thing, and that is the drawing is incredible. And also, I'd like to know, to pose for her must have been really, really.
Well, Fred Astaire helped.
If she did her whole drawing just in painting while a person's posing, that's really.
Yeah, I don't remember the drawing anywhere as much as the painting. The painting part was really, really interesting to me. She built it up. But she painted me twice, once with Red and Saskia, and Red has that painting. And I have a beautiful painting of her house on the dunes, which I gave to Saskia. And she's a wonderful painter. About posing, you know, I don't know if everybody here has posed for different painters, but in my lifetime, I've posed for a lot of different painters, and it's always hard. By learning something, it's really worth it.
Yeah.
As I always remember her taking that little bit of paint out of the big blobs as an example,
And saving the color.
saving the colors.
Thank you very, very much for actually reminding us that it was work more than parties, and that's a very valuable point. Thanks. Yes.
I actually want to bring Carrie James Marshall into the picture. And I want to acknowledge that there's a conversation going on here between Carrie James Marshall, Alex Katz, and Marcia, which is the question of like, what is okay at a certain era, and why did Alex Katz's work get, shown, and why didn't Marcia's? And maybe it is about gender, and I want to propose that. And I also want to put into the question of Carrie James Marshall and his work, and when it was shown and how it was shown, and race and gender, and these are things that, 60 years ago they weren't okay, and now they are, right, because we're showing them. And what's the equivalent of that today as a young painter? Like, what is pushing that boundary in the way that Marcia did, because her work, I think, was a little bit too feminine. So it's a lot. But.
Feminine, but not. Yeah.
Well, I think we have to be careful about scrutinizing the work. I think there's a lot that goes into the success. There's a lot of work that happens outside of the studio for an artist that contributes to a career. I wasn't there, so I don't know. But there is a political aspect that artist has to sort of advocate for their own work, build relationships. All those things go into who is remembered, who's written about, who's successful, who gets the shows, who doesn't. So I think it's important that we consider the whole thing and not merely the merits of the work, because what can happen at that point is, and I've had a dealer tell me, well, look, maybe there weren't black people, in the auctions, that kind of thing, because they weren't making the good work. The good work came later. The good work came in the 90s. It's seriously, someone told me this. But he crafted his own narrative, right? And he was obviously, missing some information. But we have to be careful in assessing the merits of the work and saying maybe the work was to this or to that. I think the work is exquisite. And I think that it was probably more about what happened around the activity in the studio that contributed to why she was there or not.
And also, let's point out historically, she's in Whitney annuals, so the catalogues of them here, and in those same Whitney annuals, Alex Katz was not represented, and Alex Katz really struggled through the 60s and 70s. He was not a superstar in those days. He's a bit of a Cadillac in the garage too. I mean, there was Carrie James Marshall is an interesting. I thought you were going to make an interesting formal case about Carrie James Marshall. You realize he's 30, 40 years younger than these guys.
I suspect Carrie probably didn't see her work. I don't know. I can't speak
I
for
think so. Absolutely
I
not.
would imagine not.
Not at all.
He was a
Anyway, let's take
Chicago.
some more voices. Yeah.
You would have liked it.
Sure.
You would have liked it.
Y'all had mentioned pop art earlier, but
Yeah,
if the panel could speak a little bit more as to the influence of that in the work. I mean, there's some obvious influences, but there's something about the stare of some of the figures that's almost reappropriated in a way, if that makes sense. And I don't know if that's too far a stretch to incorporate that into the way that people would think about making pop art. But if y'all could kind of talk about that a little bit.
And what do you mean, reappropriating what?
Well, the way that a lot of the famous pop artists were reappropriating materials, in a very obvious.
Reappropriate or appropriate?
Appropriate would be fine too, yeah.
Okay.
But
these are, of course, portraits from life.
Take Piero.
Shown. So,
Marisol did sort of like that had this kind of eyes
yes.
there.
You can see Marisol.
Marisol is
Very
strong.
good.
Yeah, it's true. Definitely. But I think, just to pick up on that point, I mean, the pop art thing, her generation is proto-pop, and really, I mean, the pop artists, just as the minimal artists did not invent reduction, the pop artists did not invent looking at popular culture. And I think we just need to constantly remind, I'm sorry to be the pedantic professor on the panel, but we do actually just need to remind ourselves of the fact that the movements that get named something don't necessarily invent the thing that you associate with its name. And
Maybe that's what he meant by reappropriation.
maybe, yeah, okay. But what's legitimate though is that there's a pop, in quotes, kind of sensibility. Shall we all participate together? There's a sensibility, a way of, there's a kind of cinematic quality, for instance, rather than caring about whether it's pop art or not, we could think about the contemporaneity, the billboard-like quality, the cinematic quality, the televisual quality, whatever. Maybe if it's there or not, or
Well,
we say we don't.
I think Derek articulated it interestingly in terms of the way it relates to design and advertising and marketing culture, which pop art all redeployed. But then I use the word metabolize, and that's where in the sense like she's metabolizing it and in a way in which like I think Benjamin thought about like infusing these commodities with something quite sublime. In that way where she's that I think she's dealing with, but also it's like she wants to make paintings, but she also wants to address the ideas that are on the table that are grabbing painting by the coattails and critiquing it and trying to dismantle it and kill it, whatever. And she's using those kind of critiques to try to figure out her way to make paintings. I mean, that's what painters always have done. And modernism, that's all you can do. And I think you see it, and that's why I bring up somebody like Domenico Nioli in that sense, this like the influence of Nioli from American pop art when it gets to Rome, and he's basically making sand sculptures as an art depovera character, and suddenly he's like, I'm going to paint clothing. Right? Fashion. He goes right into Benjamin in fashion, and this is in this room. It's all over this room. It's like I don't know if she was reading that or not, but in some way there was a kind of consciousness of it at that time that ricochets off of pop art. But I don't think she has the same meaning behind why she's thinking about those objects as Warhol or Lichtenstein was doing. Maybe Lichtenstein a little bit. That'd be a more interesting comparison, but whatever.
But she's got a formed language as they're emerging. Let's not get our history.
Right.
I mean, she's slightly older than these.
Yeah, she's ahead of them.
She's ahead of them.
Yeah.
Please, let's.
I'm not saying
No.
that she's before or after. I'm just saying that.
Well, I'm saying she is. She's before.
I'm saying she's thinking about those things,
Okay.
but she's making a painting that is more not trying to be formally innovative like a pop painting.
She was friends with de Kooning, and she also knew Larry Rivers. and I think
Melissa Rockford.
Oh, well, don't, but I'm just saying, she also knew Larry Rivers, so if you want to go into that direction, instead of emphasizing Alex Katz, I think you also have to think about Larry Rivers.
Yeah.
In that period, but also her friendship with de Kooning.
Yes. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to add something to what Marcia said before about other women having children.
Yes.
And it was just sort of dismissive. I mean, it's all the cases are different. I mean, a large part of what she seems to be about, what we've said tonight, is that her view is very feminine. I mean, and then she got depressed, she got divorced, she had kids. I mean, when you work and you go out and you make contacts and you keep yourself in the art world, it was stacked, from what I understand, against women, right? And I'm just, I guess, even now, dismissing that other women had children and having, somebody was also helping other women, like Elizabeth Murray, I think she had a fabulous husband who helped with the kids. Am I misunderstanding the secretary?
First of all, Alice Neal had 2 kids under tremendously difficult circumstances. Elizabeth Murray raised her son with no help whatsoever and created her career. She had a second marriage when she was more successful. All I was saying, I'm not diminishing the role of the burden, whatever, of having children. I'm just saying that in the 70s, many of the women who began to have other women look at their work, who began to be written about, did have children. So having children alone would not be the reason why
But it was
one
all the
would.
circumstances together, and that was.
Yeah, no, I mean, hearing what her life was like at that key moment is very explanatory.
Yeah. Thank you both. Dennis?
I just wanted to say that I don't think you have to consider the background and the context when each work was made, and you can't have this objective formal analysis that neglects what the context was and what those people were fighting against. I mean, I know that when I came to the city in like '73, you could not be a painter who was like having people pose for you, and no matter how kind of, no matter how kind of specific and minimalist your background was. I mean, Barclay Hendricks was at that time had traction, but he was using photographs, and he was sort of in the context of photorealism, which was like the big thing in the early '70s. So each context changes, and I think if you look at Alice Neal in the context of what was going on and what had gone on, right before, she was making that work at the time, even though all of the artists, knew her work. It wasn't fitting in with like the narrative that was being created, whether it was being created by men or not. It was, the men themselves had to like duke it out among themselves. There was always a competition for visibility going on, and also a narrative against which all of this stuff happens. So, and it goes to Mira's question about so why was Sylvia Slay, taken up? But that was also, aside from the Lawrence Holloway thing.
Well, the meaning says that, but they don't want to.
Value shifts. So sensitivity, I see very precise silhouettes. I see specificity in the gaze, and I see realistic nipples as opposed to like Wesselman's nipples, and an oval, which is a shape I rarely see. I see a sense of awkwardness, but I'm not going to assign those necessarily to a feminine style of painting. I'd like there to be some sort of from the panel. I'd love to hear how we are assigning that as an adjective. And the other thing is, I love that Angie mentioned Noli, because I've been looking at him lately, and I think there's a very interesting contrast between these paintings and Noli, because Noli sort of hides a breathing presence underneath an absence, like a penis, or like two people, or like a crease underneath fabric that has a pattern that moves to show this presence underneath. Because I think that these paintings kind of do the opposite. I think that there's like the presence and the absence play the flip of that. Wouldn't you say, Angie? I mean, yeah.
An artist who was incredibly popular in Italy at the time we were living there was Adami, he may not be that well known now, but...
No, Valerio Adami, sure.
He just had a huge show.
Yeah.
Good, I'm glad he's being revived, but
he's a kind of hard-edged pop kind of...
I'm saying that he was as popular as anyone.
Popular, yes, but also pop. I mean,
yes.
Derrida's favorite artist.
Well, not just, you mean in every sense. The point is that he was very popular and Marcia saw his work. So I'm bringing that out as,
so maybe not Noli, but
a Greek influence, not necessarily literal.
Right. I think we're about...
Could we get back to the feminine? How do we define a feminine?
Actually, if you don't mind, Kate, we're towards the end of the evening now, and I don't think it's time to put new questions to the panel. Is anyone bursting to ask one?
Yes,
somebody hasn't spoken yet. Who'd like to... My entire reputation of moderator is going out the window. Yeah, another person who knew Marcia has got something to say.
Martha Edelheit.
Martha, yes.
Martha Edelheit.
Well, no, first of all, I remember when Marcia had her parties, They were not parties. They were parties because she was trying to sell her work.
Exactly.
They weren't about just having a party.
Oh.
She invited people over. She had all of her portfolios out so that people would hopefully buy something
That's
so
how
she
she
could
got
pay the
Walter
rent.
to pay for
It was
her.
this-
They were rent parties, I guess.
They were
That's how
rent
she got
parties.
Walter to pay for her trip.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's
And also, I think one of the things that's missing in all of this is that Marcia had a wicked sense of humor.
Oh, yeah.
She
forgot
was
to say
really
that.
funny, and she could be really sharp and sharp-toothed. And her work is extremely cool. It's extremely frontal and extremely delicate at the same time. It was totally out of what anybody else was doing at that time. And it had nothing to do with Katz. I mean, I can't even if they were classmates, I can't even put them in the same room together in terms of visual anything. They simply don't work together. Her work, and one of the problems I think she had, even though she had some success, was that it was work that was so different. It didn't fit into pop. It did not fit into any category at that time. And it's part of what many women as artists have been doing. They have simply not fit into the box that the current mode was. They were not pop. They were not minimalist. They were not part of that scenario. And it made it extremely hard as a woman to have any kind of success.
And that answers the question, Kate, that you're asking. What she's saying answers what you're saying. And that's what I was trying to say about them, is that they don't fit in. They metabolize it all. But it doesn't redistribute those aesthetics. Because there's something very subjective about what she's doing that is singular to her.
And it was singular and unique, and it was also very much, I mean, you know, the fact that she was in Italy and she was looking at grisaille, she was looking at frescoes.
Exactly.
I mean, that's where this is coming from.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not coming from pop artists, it's coming out of that kind of a context.
Absolutely.
But
That's
they
why we
fit in
mentioned
now.
Piero in particular,
Yes.
Mantegna in particular.
They fit in this context now.
did.
Now is where, now we have a context in which all of these things are familiar and they make sense. And even though, like we're talking about like Barclay Hendricks or, I'm sorry, the woman that's painting the Obama portrait, but those things actually create the context to see these things. So I think there's, you know, a lot of times that artists don't fit in their context, but that doesn't mean that, you know, that doesn't mean they won't fit into a context at some other time.
Well, also another point to talk about context is that we think we know the past because we have our 101 art history courses that tell us there was pop art, there was minimal art, blah, blah, blah. But you look through the pages of a Whitney Annual, or you look through the ads of art news at the time, and you see that art, when it's not history, when it's the contemporary moment, is just as confused as our present feels at any time in the past. And that you've got your pop artists, you've got your minimal artists, okay, the canonical ones. You've got hundreds and hundreds of very interesting artists, some of whom are having better careers than those canonical pop and minimal artists, who are doing things that don't quite fit. I mean, somebody like Howard Kanovitz, for instance. You look at his work, you'd say, oh, you could say that of, or even of Larry Rivers. There's of many, many artists who were well considered in that moment, who don't fit neatly into the boxes anymore, and we could now romanticize them not fitting into the boxes and saying, oh, it's a unique feminine sensibility, and oh, it's because she's in Italy. No, it's because that's not the way art history works.
Right.
Sorry, that's my 2 cents. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wait,